Welcome to a story that will touch your heart and remind you that sometimes the most profound connections happen when we least expect them. This is the tale of Dr. Marcus Chen, a renowned pediatric surgeon, and two young twins whose lives he saved in an emergency operation 20 years ago. What happens when those twins return as adults with a photograph will change everything you think you know about fate, family, and the invisible threads that connect our lives. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that celebrate the human spirit. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Children's Hospital buzzed overhead as Dr. Marcus Chen scrubbed his hands for what felt like the 1,000th time that week. It was 3 a.m. on a cold December night in 2003, and the emergency department had just called with news that made his stomach clench with familiar dread. Twin boys, barely 4 years old, had been rushed in after a devastating car accident. Both children were in critical condition, and the attending physician's voice had carried that particular weight that every surgeon recognized, the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Marcus had been practicing pediatric surgery for 15 years, but something about this case felt different from the moment he heard the details. The twins, identified only as Jamie and Lucas Patterson, had been traveling with their grandmother when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into their vehicle. The grandmother hadn't survived the impact, and now these two little boys were fighting for their lives in his hospital, with no other family members located yet. As Marcus walked toward the operating room, his mind raced through the medical reports he'd quickly reviewed. Jamie had suffered severe internal bleeding and a collapsed lung, while Lucas had sustained traumatic brain injury along with multiple fractures. The complexity of treating both children simultaneously would require every ounce of his skill and experience. But it wasn't just the medical challenge that had his hands slightly trembling as he approached the OR doors. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. The first time Marcus saw the twins lying on adjacent gurneys, unconscious and connected to various machines, his breath caught in his throat. Despite their injuries and the medical equipment surrounding them, there was something achingly familiar about their faces. Jamie had dark curly hair matted with dried blood, while Lucas's lighter brown hair fell across his forehead in soft waves. Their small hands, bruised and scraped, seemed to reach toward each other even in unconsciousness, as if they instinctively knew they needed to stay connected. "Dr. Chen, we need to make a decision quickly," urged Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of emergency pediatrics. "Jamie's internal bleeding is worsening and Lucas's brain swelling is increasing. We may need to operate on both simultaneously." Marcus nodded, his professional training taking over even as his personal emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He had performed countless surgeries on children throughout his career, but something about these twins stirred feelings he had buried deep within himself for over 2 decades. As he looked at their faces, peaceful despite their critical condition, memories he had spent years suppressing began to surface. The surgical team assembled quickly, with Dr. Martinez taking charge of Lucas's neurosurgical needs while Marcus focused on Jamie's internal injuries. As they wheeled both boys into the operating theater, Marcus caught sight of a small stuffed elephant clutched in Jamie's hand. Somehow it had survived the accident intact. The toy was worn and well-loved, clearly a treasured comfort object that had probably been with the child since infancy. "Should we remove the stuffed animal?" asked one of the surgical nurses. Marcus shook his head gently. "Let him keep it as long as possible. Children need their comfort objects, especially now." His voice carried a tenderness that surprised even him. Throughout his career, he had always maintained professional distance from his young patients, knowing that emotional attachment could cloud his judgment during critical procedures. But something about these twins was already breaking through his carefully constructed walls. The surgery began at 4:15 in the morning, with both teams working in synchronized precision. Marcus's hands moved with practiced expertise as he worked to repair Jamie's damaged spleen and reinflate his collapsed lung. The child's vital signs fluctuated dangerously throughout the procedure, and several times Marcus found himself whispering quiet words of encouragement, as if the unconscious boy could somehow hear him. "Come on, little fighter," he murmured as he worked to control a particularly stubborn source of internal bleeding. You and your brother are going to get through this. I promise you that." It was an unusual promise for a surgeon to make. Medical professionals were trained never to guarantee outcomes, but something deep inside Marcus made the words feel necessary, even sacred. Meanwhile, Dr. Martinez worked methodically to relieve the pressure on Lucas's brain, her expertise evident in every careful movement. The boy's condition was perhaps even more precarious than his brother's, with brain injuries carrying risks that could affect him for the rest of his life. As the hours passed, both surgical teams pushed themselves to their limits, knowing that these two young lives depended entirely on their skill and dedication. At 6:30 in the morning, as the first hints of dawn began to filter through the hospital windows, both surgeries reached their critical phases. Jamie's internal bleeding had been successfully controlled, and his lung was beginning to function normally again. Lucas's brain swelling was gradually decreasing, and his vital signs were showing signs of stabilization. Marcus found himself glancing frequently between the two operating tables, monitoring both boys, even though Lucas wasn't technically his patient. Something about their connection to each other seemed to transcend the usual boundaries of medical care. It was as if their survival was somehow intertwined, as if losing one would doom the other. "Dr. Chen," called one of his surgical nurses, "Jamie's blood pressure is stabilizing. I think we may have turned the corner." Almost simultaneously, Dr. Martinez announced, "Lucas's intracranial pressure is decreasing. His responses are improving." As both surgeries moved toward successful completion, Marcus felt a wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. These weren't just successful procedures, they felt like something much more significant, though he couldn't yet understand what that might be. The twins had touched something deep within him, awakening feelings and memories he had spent decades trying to forget. The final sutures were placed as the morning shift arrived at the hospital, bringing with them the energy and hope of a new day. Both Jamie and Lucas were wheeled into the pediatric intensive care unit, where they would spend the next several days under constant monitoring. Their conditions were stable, but still critical, and the next 48 hours would be crucial in determining their long-term recovery prospects. As Marcus finally removed his surgical gloves and mask, exhaustion hit him like a physical weight. He had been operating for over 6 hours, but the emotional toll felt even greater than the physical one. Something about these twins had affected him in ways he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. As he walked toward the PICU to check on his young patients one more time before heading home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night had changed something fundamental in his life. The twins lay side by side in the intensive care unit, their small bodies dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding them. Jamie still clutched his stuffed elephant, and Lucas's fingers seemed to be reaching toward his brother, even in his medically induced sleep. Looking at them, Marcus felt his heart constrict with an emotion he hadn't experienced in over 20 years, a deep, protective love that went far beyond professional concern. He didn't yet understand why these particular children had affected him so profoundly, but as he stood watching them breathe steadily with the assistance of their ventilators, Marcus knew that their lives would remain connected to his in ways that extended far beyond this hospital room. The night that had begun with tragedy was ending with hope, and somehow, in saving these twins, Marcus sensed that they might eventually save something in him as well. As he prepared to leave the PICU, Marcus made a mental note to check on the boys' progress throughout the next day. Their case would require careful monitoring, multiple follow-up procedures, and extensive rehabilitation. But beyond the medical necessities, he found himself genuinely invested in their recovery, in a way that surprised him. These weren't just patients anymore. They had become something more personal, though he couldn't yet articulate exactly what that meant. The hospital corridors were quiet as Marcus finally made his way to the parking garage, the early morning sun casting long shadows through the windows. His hands were steady now, but his mind was still processing the events of the night. In 15 years of pediatric surgery, he had never felt such a profound connection to patients, especially ones he had just met. Something about Jamie and Lucas Patterson had awakened emotions he had carefully buried, feelings that threatened to change everything about how he approached his work and his life. As he drove home through the awakening city, Marcus couldn't shake the image of the twins reaching toward each other, their instinctive need for connection transcending their unconscious state. That image would stay with him throughout the difficult days ahead, serving as both inspiration and mystery as their remarkable story continued to unfold. 3 days after the surgery, Marcus found himself spending far more time in the pediatric intensive care unit than his schedule required. Jamie and Lucas were showing remarkable progress. Jamie's lung function had returned to normal, and Lucas was beginning to show encouraging neurological responses. But it wasn't just their medical improvement that drew Marcus to their bedside. It was something deeper, more personal, that he still couldn't fully understand. The twins had awakened on the second day, confused and frightened, calling out for their grandmother in weak, trembling voices. When the social worker gently explained that their grandmother hadn't survived the accident, both boys had clung to each other with a desperation that broke the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. At 4 years old, they were too young to fully comprehend the permanence of death, but old enough to understand that the person who had loved and cared for them was never coming back. Marcus had been present during that devastating conversation, and watching the twins' innocent faces crumple with grief had nearly brought him to his knees. Without thinking, he had moved closer to their beds, his professional boundaries dissolving in the face of their raw pain. When Jamie reached out with his small hand, Marcus had taken it without hesitation, offering what comfort he could to these suddenly orphaned children. "Are you going to take care of us now?" Lucas had asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes wide with hope and terror. The question had pierced Marcus's heart like a physical blow, awakening memories he had spent over 2 decades trying to suppress. "I'm going to make sure you both get better," Marcus had replied carefully, his voice thick with emotion he struggled to control. "There are people whose job it is to find you a safe, loving home. But right now, my job is to help you heal." As the days passed, Marcus learned more about the twins' situation from the hospital social worker, Mrs. Patricia Williams. Their parents had died in a house fire when the boys were barely 2 years old, and their maternal grandmother, Eleanor Patterson, had been their legal guardian ever since. Eleanor had been a widow living on a modest pension, but she had devoted her life to raising her grandsons with unwavering love and dedication. She brought them in for every checkup, never missed an appointment, Mrs. Williams explained as she reviewed their case file with Marcus. The boys were her whole world. She used to say they were the light that kept her going after losing her daughter. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that no other family members had been located. Eleanor's sister lived in Australia and was too elderly to take on the responsibility of raising 2 young children. The boys' paternal grandparents had passed away years earlier, and there were no aunts, uncles, or close family friends who could step forward. Jamie and Lucas would need to be placed in the foster care system, a prospect that filled Marcus with inexplicable anxiety. Every morning, Marcus found excuses to visit the twins during his rounds. He would check their incisions, monitor their healing progress, and ask the nurses detailed questions about their overnight condition. But increasingly, these medical visits extended into longer conversations with the boys themselves. Jamie was the more outgoing of the two, quick to smile despite his trauma, while Lucas was quieter and more observant, studying Marcus with intelligent eyes that seemed far too mature for his age. "Dr. Marcus," Jamie said one morning, using the shortened version of his name that the boys had adopted, "when we leave the hospital, will we stay together?" The question caught Marcus off guard, though he realized he should have expected it. The twins' bond was remarkable. They seemed to communicate with glances and gestures that spoke of a connection deeper than ordinary sibling relationships. The thought of them being separated was unbearable, though Marcus couldn't understand why their situation affected him so personally. "The social worker is working very hard to make sure you stay together," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. Keeping brothers together is very important. But privately, Marcus knew the statistics. Finding a foster family willing and able to take two young children simultaneously was challenging, especially when one of them had recently suffered a traumatic brain injury that might require ongoing medical care and therapy. The likelihood that Jamie and Lucas would be placed in separate homes was disturbingly high. That evening, Marcus found himself researching foster care statistics and adoption procedures on his home computer, something he had never done before in his 15-year career. He told himself it was professional interest, a desire to better understand the systems that affected his young patients. But deep down, he knew his motivation was far more personal than he was willing to admit. As he scrolled through website after website detailing the challenges facing children in foster care, Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same hollow pain he had carried since he was 7 years old. Memories he had spent decades suppressing began to surface with increasing frequency. Images of another hospital room, another social worker, another conversation about placement and separation that had shaped the entire course of his life. The next morning brought disturbing news. Mrs. Williams informed Marcus that the initial search for suitable foster families had been disappointing. 3 potential placements had fallen through when the families learned about Lucas's recent brain injury and the ongoing medical care both boys would require. The few remaining options were either unwilling to take both children or lived too far from the specialized medical facilities the boys might need for follow-up care. "We're not giving up," Mrs. Williams assured Marcus, though her expression betrayed her growing concern. "But I have to be honest with you, Dr. Chen. The system is overwhelmed, and finding placement for 2 children with medical needs and trauma history is extremely challenging. We may need to consider temporary separation while we continue searching for a family that can take them both." The word separation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He found himself gripping the edge of the nurse's station counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. Images flashed through his mind. Another hospital room, another social worker delivering similar news. The devastating moment when he had been torn away from the only family he had ever known. "How long before you would have to make that decision?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. "We have perhaps another week before the hospital will need their beds for other patients," Mrs. Williams replied. "After that, if we haven't found suitable placement, we'll have to use whatever temporary options are available, even if it means separating them initially." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through his empty apartment, a spacious but sterile place that had never felt like a real home. For years he had convinced himself that his solitary lifestyle was a choice, that his dedication to his career left no time for personal relationships or family commitments. But watching Jamie and Lucas face the same devastating separation he had experienced as a child was forcing him to confront truths he had spent decades avoiding. At 3 a.m, Marcus found himself sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a photograph he kept hidden in a drawer. A faded picture of himself at age 7, standing next to another boy who looked remarkably similar. His twin brother, David, had been his constant companion, his other half, until a tragic accident had changed everything. The car crash that killed their parents had also resulted in their separation, when no single family could be found to take both boys. Marcus had been placed with a loving but strict family who had supported his academic pursuits, while David had disappeared into a series of foster homes that Marcus had never been allowed to contact. The parallels between his own childhood tragedy and the situation facing Jamie and Lucas were impossible to ignore. These boys were facing the same devastating separation that had defined Marcus's entire life, the same loss of connection that had left him emotionally isolated despite his professional success. As he looked at the faded photograph, Marcus realized that perhaps this wasn't a coincidence at all. Perhaps Jamie and Lucas had come into his life for a reason he was only beginning to understand. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the hospital with a decision that surprised even him. He sought out Mrs. Williams before beginning his usual rounds, his heart pounding with anxiety and determination. "I want to inquire about becoming a foster parent," he said, the words feeling foreign but somehow inevitable as they left his mouth. Specifically, I want to know what would be required for me to provide temporary care for Jamie and Lucas while a permanent placement is being arranged. Mrs. Williams stared at him in shock, clearly not expecting such an offer from the typically reserved surgeon. Doctor, and that's incredibly generous, but fostering requires extensive background checks, home studies, training courses. The process typically takes months. What about emergency placement? Marcus pressed, his determination growing stronger with each word. There must be provisions for urgent situations. As they discussed the possibilities, Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since deciding to become a pediatric surgeon. Perhaps it was time to stop running from his past and start using it to help these boys who needed him. The twins had awakened something in him that had been dormant for too long, and maybe, just maybe, saving them would help him save himself as well. The conversation with Mrs. Williams lasted nearly an hour, covering the complex requirements and procedures involved in emergency foster placement. While the standard process could take months, there were provisions for expedited approval. In cases involving medical professionals with clean backgrounds and urgent child welfare needs, Marcus would need to undergo accelerated background checks, home inspections, and abbreviated training sessions. But it was possible. I have to ask, Dr. Chen, Mrs. Williams said gently, what's motivating this decision? You've been working with pediatric patients for years without ever expressing interest in fostering. Marcus paused, considering how much to reveal about his personal history. Let's just say I understand what it's like for children to lose everything and face separation from the people they love most. I don't want that to happen to Jamie and Lucas if there's any way to prevent it. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into the foster care application process with the same intensity he brought to complex surgical procedures. He arranged for the required home inspection, completed extensive paperwork, and began the accelerated training program. Meanwhile, he continued his daily visits with the twins, who were growing stronger physically but remained emotionally fragile. The boys had begun to associate Marcus with safety and stability in their uncertain world. When he entered their room each morning, their faces would light up with genuine joy, and they would compete for his attention with stories about their dreams, their fears, and their memories of life with their grandmother. These conversations revealed the depth of their bond and their desperate need to remain together. Dr. Marcus, Lucas said one afternoon, his voice serious beyond his years, Jamie and I promised Grandma Eleanor we would always take care of each other. Do you think she can see us from heaven? The question brought tears to Marcus's eyes, reminding him of similar promises he had made with his own twin brother before they were separated. I think your grandmother will always be watching over you both, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. And I think she would be very proud of how brave and strong you're both being. The foster care approval process moved with unprecedented speed, aided by Marcus's spotless background, his medical credentials, and the urgent nature of the situation. Within a week, he received preliminary approval for emergency placement, pending final home inspection and completion of required training modules. The night before the final inspection, Marcus stood in his apartment, seeing it through the eyes of social workers and two young children who desperately needed a safe haven. His sterile professional living space would need to become a home, something he had never really created for himself, let alone for others. But as he imagined Jamie and Lucas running through these rooms, filling them with laughter and life, Marcus felt a warmth he hadn't experienced since childhood. The final home inspection took place on a Thursday morning in January, exactly 3 weeks after the twins' accident. Marcus had spent the previous evening transforming his spare bedroom into a space suitable for two young boys, complete with twin beds, colorful bedding, and a small bookshelf filled with age-appropriate stories. He had also purchased toys, clothes, and other necessities, though he felt completely out of his depth when it came to understanding what 4-year-old children actually needed. Mrs. Williams arrived with another social worker, conducting a thorough evaluation of Marcus's living situation. They examined everything from the safety locks he had installed on cabinets to the child-proofed electrical outlets throughout the apartment. But more importantly, They questioned him extensively about his motivations, his understanding of the challenges ahead, and his commitment to providing emotional support for traumatized children. Dr. Chen, Mrs. Williams said as they concluded the inspection, "I want to be completely honest with you about what you're taking on. These boys have experienced tremendous loss and trauma. They may have nightmares, behavioral issues, difficulty adjusting to new routines. Lucas may require ongoing therapy for his brain injury. Are you prepared for the reality that this could be more challenging than any surgery you've ever performed?" Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding that she was giving him one final opportunity to reconsider. "I've been thinking about nothing else for the past week," he replied. "I know it won't be easy, but I also know what it's like to be a child facing an uncertain future, with no control over what happens next. If I can provide stability and keep them together during this critical time, then whatever challenges arise will be worth it." The approval came through that afternoon. Marcus was officially certified as an emergency foster parent, authorized to provide temporary care for Jamie and Lucas, while the search for a permanent adoptive family continued. When he received the phone call confirming the decision, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror, unlike anything he had experienced since his first solo surgery 15 years earlier. Telling the twins about the arrangement required careful consideration. Marcus knew they were too young to fully understand the complexities of foster care, but they needed to know that they would have a safe place to go when they were discharged from the hospital. He chose to break the news during one of their regular afternoon visits, bringing with him a photo of their new bedroom and a small gift for each boy. "Jamie, Lucas, I have something very important to tell you," Marcus began, settling into the chair between their beds. "You know how we've been talking about finding you a place to live while you get completely better?" Both boys nodded, their expressions becoming serious and attentive. Despite their young age, they had developed an acute awareness of adult conversations that might affect their future. "Well, I've been working with Mrs. Williams, and if you'd like, you can come stay at my house for a while. You would have your own room with 2 beds, so you could be together, and I would take care of you until we find you a forever family." The twins exchanged one of their meaningful glances, communicating in that wordless way that had become so familiar to Marcus. Then Jamie, always the more vocal of the two, asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Would we still be brothers there? Would anyone try to separate us?" "You will always be brothers, no matter where you are," Marcus replied firmly. "And as long as you're staying with me, you will definitely stay together. That's a promise." Lucas, who had been quietly studying Marcus's face, suddenly spoke up. "Are you lonely in your house, Doctor?" "Marcus, is that why you want us to come?" The question was so perceptive, so unexpectedly profound coming from a 4-year-old, that Marcus felt his breath catch. These children had already learned to read adult emotions with startling accuracy, a skill born from their recent experiences with loss and uncertainty. "You know what, Lucas? I think maybe I have been lonely, but I didn't realize it until I met you and Jamie. Sometimes it takes special people to help us understand things about ourselves." The twins were discharged from the hospital on a Sunday morning in late January. Marcus had arranged to take a week off from his surgical schedule to help them adjust to their new living situation. As he helped them gather their few belongings, mostly items donated by the hospital staff who had grown attached to them, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar surgical gown. The drive to his apartment was quiet, with both boys staring out the windows at the city passing by. They were leaving the only place they had known since their accident, moving toward another unknown situation with another adult who claimed to care about them. Marcus could only imagine the thoughts running through their young minds. "Are we going to live in a big building like the hospital?" Jamie asked as they pulled into the parking garage of Marcus's apartment complex. "Sort of," Marcus replied. "But it's much quieter and there are no medical machines or nurses walking around all the time. It's going to be very different from the hospital." The first few days were challenging in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. The twins were physically recovered from their injuries, but emotionally they were still fragile and hypervigilant. They followed Marcus everywhere, afraid to let him out of their sight for more than a few minutes. They slept poorly, often waking from nightmares about the accident or crying for their grandmother. Marcus found himself completely unprepared for the intensity of caring for traumatized children. His medical training had taught him how to heal their bodies, but addressing their emotional wounds required skills he was still learning. He researched child psychology, consulted with pediatric therapists, and tried to create routines that would help the boys feel secure and stable. Gradually, small signs of progress began to emerge. Jamie started playing with the toys Marcus had purchased, building elaborate structures with blocks and creating imaginary worlds where children were always safe and families never got separated. Lucas, still quieter and more reserved, began following Marcus around the apartment, watching everything he did with intense curiosity. "Why do you make your bed every morning?" Lucas asked one day, standing in the doorway of Marcus's bedroom. "I guess it makes me feel like I'm starting the day in an organized way," Marcus replied, smoothing the corners of his comforter. "Would you like to learn how to make your bed too?" These small domestic moments became the foundation of their developing relationship. Marcus taught the boys how to set the table, how to sort laundry, how to water the plants he had hastily purchased to make the apartment feel more homey. In return, the twins taught him about the simple joys of childhood, the excitement of discovering new books, the satisfaction of completing a puzzle, the comfort of bedtime stories read in silly voices. 3 weeks into their new living arrangement, Marcus received a call that made his heart sink. Mrs. Williams had found a potential adoptive family, a couple in their 30s who were eager to provide a permanent home for both boys. They lived in a neighboring state, had experience with children who had medical needs, and were willing to maintain contact with Marcus as the boys' original surgeon. "This is wonderful news, Dr. Chen," Mrs. Williams said, though she seemed to sense his mixed emotions through the phone. "The Hendersons are exactly the kind of family we hope to find. They want to meet the boys next week, and if everyone gets along well, begin the transition process immediately." Marcus knew he should feel relieved and happy. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he agreed to provide temporary foster care, a loving, permanent family for Jamie and Lucas. But as he hung up the phone and looked around his apartment, now filled with children's laughter and scattered toys, he realized that somewhere along the way, his feelings had become far more complicated than he had anticipated. That evening, as he helped the twins with their bedtime routine, Marcus struggled with how to tell them about the potential adoption. They had been through so many changes in such a short time, and just as they were beginning to feel secure in his home, they would need to face another transition. "Dr. Marcus," Jamie said as Marcus tucked him into bed, "are you going to be our daddy forever?" The innocent question hit Marcus like a physical blow, revealing the depth of attachment these children had formed to him and he to them. For the first time since becoming their temporary guardian, Marcus allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. He didn't want to let them go. "We'll talk about that tomorrow, okay?" Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Right now, just know that you're safe, you're together, and you're very loved." As he turned off the lights in their room, Marcus realized that saving Jamie and Lucas had indeed changed everything about his life, but not in the ways he had expected. These children hadn't just recovered from their physical injuries in his care. They had awakened parts of his heart he thought had died along with his own childhood dreams of family and belonging. The question now was whether he would have the courage to fight for the family they had unexpectedly created together. Standing in the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to their quiet breathing and occasional whispered conversations, Marcus felt the full weight of what was happening. These boys had become more than his temporary responsibility. They had become his sons in every way that mattered except legally. The thought of watching them drive away with strangers, no matter how loving and qualified those strangers might be, was almost unbearable. But Marcus also knew that his own desires couldn't be the deciding factor. Jamie and Lucas deserved a family that could offer them everything they needed for a full and happy life. They deserved parents who had chosen to become parents, not someone who had stumbled into the role through circumstance and unresolved childhood trauma. The question was whether Marcus could honestly say he was prepared to be that kind of parent, not just for the immediate future, but for the rest of their lives. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of children sleeping in his home. For the first time in 20 years, his apartment felt truly alive, filled with purpose and love and the beautiful chaos that came with family life. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions and conversations that could change everything for all three of them. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they were together, safe, and home. The Henderson family arrived on a Tuesday morning, driving up in a pristine minivan equipped with child safety seats and filled with toys and games, intended to help them bond with Jamie and Lucas. Marcus watched from his apartment window as they approached the building, his stomach churning with emotions he struggled to identify. David and Sarah Henderson looked exactly like the perfect adoptive parents, young, energetic, financially stable, and genuinely excited about expanding their family. Mrs. Williams had arranged for the initial meeting to take place in Marcus's apartment, believing that the familiar environment would help the twins feel more comfortable during what was certain to be an overwhelming experience. As Marcus prepared coffee and arranged chairs in his living room, Jamie and Lucas clung to his sides, sensing the importance of the day even though they didn't fully understand what was happening. "Dr. Marcus," Lucas whispered, tugging on his shirt, "are these the people who want to be our new parents?" The question pierced Marcus's heart, but he knelt down to meet Lucas's eyes, determined to be honest with both boys about the situation they were facing. "They're a family who would very much like to meet you and see if you might be happy living with them. But nothing is decided yet, okay? Today is just about getting to know each other." When the Hendersons entered the apartment, their genuine warmth and enthusiasm were immediately apparent. Sarah had brought homemade cookies, while David carried a bag filled with books and puzzles carefully selected for 4-year-old boys. Their approach was gentle and patient, allowing Jamie and Lucas to observe them from the safety of Marcus's proximity before attempting any direct interaction. "We've heard so much about you both," Sarah said, settling onto the floor at the twins' eye level. "Dr. Chen told us that you're very brave boys who take good care of each other." Jamie, always more outgoing, was the first to respond to their overtures, curious about the toys they had brought and impressed by David's ability to make silly voices while reading stories. Lucas remained more reserved, but Marcus could see him studying the couple with his characteristic intensity, evaluating whether these strangers could be trusted with their safety and happiness. The visit lasted 3 hours, during which the Hendersons demonstrated remarkable patience and skill in connecting with traumatized children. They didn't push for physical affection or force conversations, instead allowing Jamie and Lucas to set the pace of their interaction. By the end of the morning, both boys were engaged in play, though they still returned frequently to Marcus's side for reassurance. "They seem like wonderful children," David told Marcus as they prepared to leave. "We understand they've been through tremendous trauma, and we're prepared for the challenges that might bring. Our primary concern is making sure they feel loved and secure." After the Hendersons left, Marcus found himself alone with the twins and a decision that felt impossible to make. The couple was everything he had hoped for when he agreed to provide temporary foster care. Loving, stable, committed to keeping the boys together. They lived in a house with a large backyard, had extended family nearby, and were planning to enroll Jamie and Lucas in an excellent school system. "Did you like them?" Marcus asked the boys as they sat together on the couch processing the morning's events. "Sarah smells like cookies," Jamie observed, which Marcus interpreted as a positive assessment. "And David knows a lot of funny stories." Lucas was characteristically more thoughtful in his response. "They seem nice, but—" He paused, struggling to articulate thoughts that were complex even for adults to express. "Do they have room in their hearts for both of us? Really and truly?" The question revealed the depth of these children's emotional intelligence and their fundamental fear of being separated or unwanted. Marcus pulled both boys closer, marveling at their resilience and wisdom. "I think they do have room in their hearts for both of you," Marcus replied honestly. But that's something you'll have to decide for yourselves as you get to know them better. Over the next few days, Marcus arranged additional visits with the Hendersons, gradually increasing the amount of time the twins spent with their potential adoptive parents. Each interaction went well, with Jamie and Lucas slowly warming to the couple's genuine affection and consistent presence. The Hendersons invited them to visit their home, showed them the bedroom that would be theirs, and introduced them to their extended family members who lived nearby. But even as the adoption process moved forward smoothly, Marcus found himself struggling with emotions that grew more intense each day. Watching Jamie and Lucas bond with another family should have filled him with relief and satisfaction. Instead, he felt as though he was losing something precious that he had never expected to find. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon, when Marcus was helping the boys pack their belongings for an overnight visit with the Hendersons. As he folded their small clothes and gathered their favorite toys, Marcus was overwhelmed by the realization that this domestic routine, which had become so natural and meaningful to him, would soon end forever. "Dr. Marcus, are you sad?" Lucas asked, appearing in the doorway with his stuffed elephant, the same toy that had survived the accident and had become his primary comfort object. Marcus paused in his packing, considering how to respond honestly without burdening these children with his adult emotions. "I think I am a little sad," he admitted. "I've really enjoyed having you and Jamie living here with me, but I'm also happy that you might have found a family who can give you everything you need." Lucas approached slowly, studying Marcus's face with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see far more than his 4 years should allow. "Do you love us, Dr. Marcus?" The question hung in the air between them, simple in its phrasing but profound in its implications. Marcus realized that this 4-year-old boy was asking him to confront the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. "Yes, Lucas, I love you and Jamie very much." "Then why are you giving us away?" The innocent words hit Marcus like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the fundamental contradiction in his actions. He was facilitating the placement of these children with another family, not because it was necessarily best for them, but because he had convinced himself that his love wasn't enough, that his solitary life couldn't be transformed into the kind of family they deserved. That night, after the twins had gone to sleep, Marcus found himself sitting at his kitchen table with the faded photograph of himself and his twin brother David. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember not just the pain of their separation, but the joy of their connection before tragedy struck. He remembered how they had protected each other, comforted each other, shared everything from toys to dreams, to that wordless communication that only twins seemed to possess. Looking at that old photograph, Marcus realized that his fear of losing Jamie and Lucas was rooted in something deeper than simple attachment. These boys had awakened memories of what it felt like to be part of an unbreakable bond, to have someone who understood you completely and loved you unconditionally. They had reminded him of what he had lost when he and David were separated, and what he had been searching for unconsciously throughout his entire adult life. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of taking the twins to the Hendersons' house for their scheduled visit, he called Mrs. Williams and asked for an emergency meeting. When she arrived at his apartment an hour later, she found Marcus sitting on the floor with Jamie and Lucas, all 3 of them working on a puzzle together. "Mrs. Williams," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to propose, "I want to formally apply to adopt Jamie and Lucas myself. I know this wasn't the original plan, but I've realized that what started as temporary foster care has become something much more important. These boys aren't just my patients or my responsibility anymore. They're my sons, and I'm their father, and I think we all deserve the chance to make that official." The social worker stared at him in shock, clearly not having anticipated this development. "Dr. Chen, this is a significant decision. The Hendersons are expecting to move forward with the adoption. There are legal and ethical considerations we need to discuss." "I understand that," Marcus replied, pulling both boys closer to his sides. "But I also understand that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that feel impossible until they suddenly feel inevitable. I love these children, Mrs. Williams. I want to be their father, not just temporarily, but forever. I want to give them the kind of family that keeps them together and keeps them safe and helps them grow into the amazing people I know they can become. Jamie and Lucas looked up at him with wonder and hope dawning in their eyes, beginning to understand that the man who had saved their lives might be about to save their future as well. "Does that mean we can stay with you forever?" Jamie asked, his voice filled with excitement and disbelief. "If Mrs. Williams and the courts agree, and if that's what you both want, then yes," Marcus replied, feeling tears he had held back for weeks finally beginning to fall. "It means we can be a real family." The twins exchanged one of their meaningful glances, that wordless communication that had become so familiar to Marcus over the past months. Then they both launched themselves into his arms simultaneously, holding him tight, as if they could make his promise real through the sheer force of their embrace. Mrs. Williams watched this reunion with mixed emotions, understanding the genuine love that had developed between Marcus and the children, but also aware of the complications this decision would create. "Dr. Chen, I need to be honest with you about what this means. The Hendersons have already begun attachment proceedings, and they're going to be devastated by this change. We'll need to conduct a full evaluation of your home, your finances, your ability to provide long-term care for 2 children with potential ongoing medical needs." "I understand," Marcus said, not loosening his hold on the boys. "I'm prepared for whatever process is required. I should have realized sooner that this wasn't temporary for any of us." Over the next hour, Mrs. Williams explained the complex legal process that would be required to change course from the Henderson adoption to Marcus's petition. There would be home studies, psychological evaluations, court hearings, and extensive documentation required to prove that this change was in the children's best interests, rather than simply a case of an adult changing his mind. "The most important factor will be what Jamie and Lucas want," Mrs. Williams explained. "They'll need to be interviewed by child psychologists to ensure they understand the implications of staying with you versus going to the Henderson family." That afternoon, after Mrs. Williams left to begin the legal process, Marcus sat down with the twins for the most important conversation of their young lives. He needed to make sure they understood that this decision couldn't be based on fear of change or simple familiarity, but on genuine desire for the life they would build together. "I want you both to think very carefully about what you want," Marcus told them. "The Henderson family is wonderful, and they could give you a beautiful life with a big house and lots of cousins, and the kind of family most children dream about. If you choose to stay with me, it will just be the 3 of us, and I'm still learning how to be a good father." Lucas, always the more thoughtful of the two, spoke first. "Dr. Marcus, when we were in the hospital, you promised you would take care of us. Did you mean just until we got better, or did you mean always?" The question revealed that these children had been listening more carefully to adult conversations than anyone had realized, and that they understood the difference between temporary care and permanent commitment. "I meant always, Lucas. I just didn't understand that myself until now." "Then we want to stay with you always too," Jamie declared with the certainty that only children can possess. "You're already our family. We don't need a different one." That evening, as Marcus helped the twins with their bedtime routine, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. The legal process ahead would be challenging, and he would need to make significant changes to his life to accommodate his new role as a single father. But for the first time in over 20 years, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he belonged, with the people who belonged with him. The adoption process proved to be more complex and emotionally challenging than Marcus had anticipated. The Hendersons, understandably devastated by the sudden change in plans, initially contested his petition, arguing that they had already invested months in bonding with the children and preparing for their arrival. The legal proceedings stretched on for 6 months, during which time Jamie and Lucas remained in Marcus's care under temporary guardianship, while the courts evaluated what would truly be in their best interests. During this uncertain period, Marcus threw himself into creating the most stable, loving environment possible for the twins. He reduced his surgical schedule to part-time, arranging his cases around school pickup times and family dinners. His colleagues were initially puzzled by his sudden shift in priorities, but those who witnessed his transformation from solitary workaholic to devoted father couldn't help but admire the changes they saw in him. "You're different, Marcus," observed Dr. Sarah Martinez during one of their consultations on a complex pediatric case. "I've never seen you this happy, even when you were performing your most successful surgeries." Marcus smiled, thinking about the morning's chaos as he had helped Jamie find his missing shoe, while simultaneously braiding Lucas's hair for school picture day. "I think I finally understand what it means to have a purpose beyond my work," he replied. "Don't get me wrong, I still love surgery, but now I have something even more important waiting for me at home." The twins adapted to their new routine with remarkable resilience, though they still carried emotional scars from their early trauma. Lucas continued to have occasional nightmares about the accident, often waking up calling for his grandmother or crying about being separated from Jamie. During these difficult nights, Marcus would sit with both boys, reading stories or simply holding them until they felt safe enough to return to sleep. Jamie, meanwhile, had developed a habit of checking constantly to make sure Marcus was still nearby, a behavior that child psychologists explained was common among children who had experienced sudden traumatic loss. Even when Marcus was just in the next room, Jamie would call out periodically, needing verbal confirmation that his new father hadn't disappeared like the other important adults in his life. "Dr. Marcus, are you still here?" became a familiar refrain throughout their days together. "I'm still here, Jamie. I'm always going to be here," Marcus would respond, understanding that these reassurances were building the foundation of trust that would sustain their relationship for years to come. The court-appointed child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Foster conducted extensive interviews with all parties involved in the adoption dispute. Her evaluation would carry significant weight in the final decision, making her sessions with Jamie and Lucas particularly crucial. Marcus waited anxiously outside her office during each appointment, knowing that the children's own voices would ultimately determine their future. "The boys are remarkably articulate about their feelings and preferences," Dr. Foster told Marcus after one particularly lengthy session. "They clearly understand the difference between the two family options available to them, and they consistently express a strong preference for remaining with you. However, I need to ensure that this preference is based on genuine attachment, rather than fear of another major change." To help make this determination, Dr. Foster arranged for Jamie and Lucas to spend additional time with the Hendersons, observing how they interacted when they believed their placement wasn't under scrutiny. The results were telling. While the twins were polite and cooperative with their potential adoptive parents, they remained emotionally distant, frequently asking when they could return to Marcus's house. Meanwhile, Marcus was undergoing his own evaluation process, including extensive interviews about his childhood, his motivations for adoption, and his understanding of the long-term commitment he was seeking to make. It was during these sessions that he finally began to speak openly about his own twin brother and the separation that had shaped his entire adult life. "I was 7 years old when David and I were separated," Marcus told Dr. Foster during one of their sessions. "We had survived the car accident that killed our parents, but no single family was willing or able to take both of us. I went to the Williamson family, good people who supported my education and helped me become a doctor. But David—" Marcus paused, his voice catching with emotion he had suppressed for decades. "David went through a series of foster homes, and I was never allowed to maintain contact with him. The system decided it would be better for our adjustment if we started fresh with our new families." Dr. Foster leaned forward, recognizing the significance of this revelation. "How did losing your brother affect your development, Dr. Chen?" "I spent my entire childhood and most of my adult life feeling like half of myself was missing," Marcus replied honestly. "I threw myself into my studies, then my medical career, telling myself that academic and professional success could fill that void. But it never did. When I met Jamie and Lucas, something inside me recognized what they had, that unbreakable twin bond that I had lost. I couldn't bear the thought of them experiencing the same devastating separation that destroyed my connection with David. This conversation proved to be a turning point in the evaluation process. Dr. Foster began to understand that Marcus's desire to adopt the twins wasn't driven by impulsive emotion or unresolved grief, but by a deep, informed understanding of what these children needed to thrive. His own experience with separation gave him unique insight into the psychological importance of keeping Jamie and Lucas together, even if it meant choosing a single-parent home over a traditional two-parent family. The final court hearing took place on a sunny morning in September, almost exactly 1 year after the twins' accident. Marcus sat in the courtroom with Jamie and Lucas beside him, both boys dressed in their best clothes and holding hands tightly as they waited for the judge to announce the decision that would determine their future. The Hendersons sat across the aisle with their attorney, still hoping for a ruling in their favor. Marcus felt genuine sympathy for them. They had entered this process with pure intentions, genuinely wanting to provide a loving home for children in need. But as he looked down at Jamie and Lucas, who had positioned themselves protectively on either side of him, Marcus knew that some bonds transcended logic and legal procedures. Judge Patricia Coleman had reviewed all the evidence, interviewed all parties, and consulted with child welfare experts before reaching her decision. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of changing 3 lives forever. This case has required me to weigh numerous factors in determining what arrangement would best serve the interests of these 2 remarkable children, Judge Coleman began. Both potential families offer genuine love, stability, and commitment to keeping the boys together. Both Dr. Chen and Mr. and Mrs. Henderson have demonstrated their capacity to provide excellent care. Marcus felt his heart pounding as the judge continued her deliberation, knowing that the next few sentences would determine everything. However, after careful consideration of all evidence, including extensive interviews with Jamie and Lucas themselves, I am convinced that these children have already formed their primary attachment with Dr. Chen. They have been through tremendous trauma and loss, but they have found healing and security in his care. To disrupt this established bond would constitute another significant trauma, which I am unwilling to inflict upon children who have already endured more than their share of loss. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as the judge's words began to sink in. Beside him, Jamie and Lucas were looking up at him with growing excitement, beginning to understand that their deepest wish was about to be granted. Therefore, I am granting Dr. Marcus Chen's petition for adoption. Jamie and Lucas Patterson will become Jamie and Lucas Chen, with all the legal rights and protections that come with permanent family status. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as Marcus pulled both boys into his arms, finally able to hold them as their legal father, rather than their temporary guardian. After a year of uncertainty and legal proceedings, they were officially and permanently a family. "Does this mean we never have to leave you?" Lucas whispered into Marcus's ear as they embraced. "Never," Marcus whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "We're together forever now. That's what family means." As they left the courthouse that day, Marcus realized that saving Jamie and Lucas's lives in that operating room had been just the beginning of their story together. The real miracle had been discovering that by giving them a family, they had given him something he had been searching for his entire life, a sense of wholeness and belonging that no professional achievement could ever provide. The weeks following the adoption were filled with the joy and chaos of settling into their new normal as a legally recognized family. Marcus had the boys' names officially changed to Chen, and they celebrated with a small party at home, complete with a cake that Jamie had helped decorate and Lucas had insisted on making himself. The simple domestic happiness of these moments filled Marcus with a contentment he had never imagined possible. But even as they built their new life together, Marcus carried within him the unresolved pain of his own separation from his twin brother. Late at night, after Jamie and Lucas were asleep, he would sometimes find himself wondering about David, where he was, whether he had found happiness, if he ever thought about the brother he had lost so many years ago. The joy of keeping the twins together had also awakened Marcus's grief for the family bond he had never been able to preserve. One evening, As he was tucking the boys into bed, Lucas asked a question that cut straight to the heart of Marcus's hidden pain. "Dr. Marcus, I mean Daddy," Lucas said, still getting used to the new title. "Do you have a brother somewhere? Sometimes when you look at me and Jamie together, you get a sad look in your eyes." Marcus sat down on the edge of Lucas's bed, marveling once again at this child's perceptive nature. "I did have a brother once," he replied carefully. "A twin brother, just like you and Jamie are twins. But we got separated when we were very young, and I haven't seen him since." "That's the saddest thing I ever heard," Jamie said from his bed across the room. "Don't you miss him terribly?" "Every day," Marcus admitted, feeling tears he had held back for decades finally beginning to fall. "Every single day for the past 28 years. The twins exchanged one of their meaningful glances, and Marcus could almost see them formulating a plan in that wordless way they had of communicating. He had learned to recognize that particular expression. It usually preceded some ambitious project or unexpected question that would challenge his parenting skills in entirely new ways. "Maybe we could help you find him," Lucas suggested, with the kind of innocent confidence that only children possess. "We could make posters like they do for lost dogs, or we could ask Mrs. Williams to help us look." Marcus smiled through his tears, touched by their desire to help heal his old wound. "That's very sweet of you both, but finding someone after so many years is very complicated. I don't even know if he would want to see me." But as he kissed both boys goodnight and turned off their bedroom light, Marcus found himself thinking seriously about their suggestion for the first time in years. Perhaps it was time to stop carrying this pain alone and start actively searching for the brother he had never stopped missing. After all, Jamie and Lucas had taught him that sometimes the most important things in life were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they might seem. 20 years passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Jamie and Lucas grew from traumatized 4-year-olds into confident, compassionate young men who had never forgotten the love that had saved them or the family that had chosen them. Marcus watched with pride as they graduated from high school, then college, pursuing careers that reflected the values he had tried to instill in them. Jamie became a social worker specializing in foster care, while Lucas followed his adoptive father's path into medicine, though he chose pediatric psychology rather than surgery. Throughout those 2 decades, Marcus had never stopped thinking about his lost brother David, but the demands of raising 2 children had made any serious search impossible. There had been a few half-hearted attempts over the years, internet searches that yielded no results, calls to agencies that had no records, consultations with private investigators who charged enormous fees for minimal information. Eventually, Marcus had resigned himself to the probability that David was either unreachable or unwilling to be found. But Jamie and Lucas had never forgotten their father's pain, and as they entered their 20s, they began their own investigation into finding their uncle. Using modern technology and social media platforms that hadn't existed during Marcus's earlier searches, they methodically worked through adoption records, foster care databases, and reunion websites. It became their shared mission, a way to repay the man who had given them everything by helping him find the one thing that had always been missing from his life. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 24 years after Marcus had first saved the twins' lives. Jamie called his father at the hospital, his voice trembling with excitement and nervous energy. "Dad, you need to sit down," Jamie said, using the title that had long ago replaced the formal Dr. Marcus of their early relationship. "Lucas and I found him. We found Uncle David." Marcus felt his legs give way and he sank into his office chair, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror he hadn't experienced since the twins' adoption hearing. "Are you certain? How do you know it's really him?" "We're certain," Lucas's voice came through the speakerphone as he joined the conversation. "His name is David Chen Martinez now. He was adopted by a Hispanic family when he was 9, after aging out of several foster homes. Dad, he's been looking for you too. He's been registered on reunion websites for 15 years. The revelation that David had been actively searching for him hit Marcus like a physical blow. All these years, while Marcus had been raising Jamie and Lucas and building his medical career, his twin brother had been out there somewhere, missing him just as desperately as Marcus had been missing him. "There's more, Dad," Jamie continued, his voice gentle but excited. "He lives in Phoenix now. He's a high school teacher and he has a family of his own. But Dad, he has something that's going to change everything." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the flood of emotions washing over him. After 28 years of separation, the possibility of reuniting with David felt both miraculous and terrifying. "What does he have?" "A photograph," Lucas replied. "The same photograph you keep in your desk drawer, the one of you and him when you were 7, taken just before the accident. He's kept it all these years, just like you have." Tears streamed down Marcus's face as he realized the significance of this revelation. Both brothers had clung to the same image, the same memory of their connection, carrying it through decades of separation and loss. The photograph had been more than just a memento. It had been proof that their bond had survived, despite everything that had tried to destroy it. "He wants to see you, Dad," Jamie said softly. "We've been talking to him for weeks, preparing for this moment. He's been afraid to reach out directly because he wasn't sure if you'd want to reconnect after all this time. But when we told him about our family, about how you saved us and adopted us, he started crying and said it made perfect sense that you would become the kind of father who keeps families together instead of letting them be torn apart." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and careful planning. David was just as nervous as Marcus about their reunion, but both brothers were determined to bridge the gap that had separated them for so long. They decided to meet at Marcus's home, where Jamie and Lucas could be present to provide support and witness the healing of their family's oldest wound. David arrived on a Saturday afternoon, driving up in a modest sedan with his wife Maria and their teenage daughter Sophia. Marcus watched from his window as his brother emerged from the car, and despite the passage of nearly 3 decades, the recognition was instant and overwhelming. David had the same dark hair, now streaked with gray, the same gentle eyes, the same way of moving that Marcus remembered from their childhood. But more than physical similarity, there was something indefinable that spoke of their shared essence, their twinship that had survived despite everything. When Marcus opened the front door, both brothers stood frozen for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other after so many years. David was holding an envelope that Marcus knew contained the photograph, their photograph, the one that had sustained them both through decades of separation. "Marcus," David said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I've been looking for you for so long." "I know," Marcus replied, stepping forward to embrace the brother he had never stopped missing. "I've been looking for you, too." The reunion was everything Marcus had imagined and more. As they sat in his living room, sharing stories of their separate lives while Jamie and Lucas listened with rapt attention, Marcus felt pieces of himself clicking back into place, pieces he hadn't even realized were missing. David spoke about his struggles in foster care, his eventual adoption by the Martinez family, who had given him stability and love, his career as a teacher, and his own family who had heard stories about his lost twin brother for years. "I became a teacher because I wanted to help kids who felt lost and alone," David explained. "Every student I've worked with has been, in some way, my attempt to heal the child I used to be, the one who lost his brother and never understood why." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "I became a pediatric surgeon for similar reasons. Every child I've operated on has been my attempt to save someone the way I couldn't save us, couldn't keep us together when we needed each other most." As the afternoon wore on, David pulled out the envelope he had been carrying and removed the faded photograph that had been his most treasured possession for 28 years. It was identical to the one Marcus kept in his desk. 2 7-year-old boys standing side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, faces bright with the innocent happiness that existed before tragedy changed everything. "I used to stare at this picture and try to remember what it felt like to have someone who understood me completely," David said, his voice thick with emotion. someone who shared not just my DNA but my soul. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his own copy of the same photograph, worn smooth from years of handling. I did the same thing. This picture was the only proof I had that the happiness in my memories was real, not just something I had imagined. Jamie and Lucas watched this exchange with tears in their eyes, finally understanding the full magnitude of their father's sacrifice in choosing to keep them together. They had always known they were lucky to have been adopted by Marcus, but now they realized that his determination to prevent their separation had been driven by his own devastating experience with loss. As the evening progressed, Marcus introduced David to his extended family, colleagues from the hospital, neighbors who had watched Jamie and Lucas grow up, friends who had become surrogate grandparents to the boys. Each introduction carried the weight of 28 years of separation finally being healed, of a family that was becoming whole again. "You know," David said as they sat on the back deck that night watching their children, Marcus's adopted sons and David's biological daughter, getting acquainted, "I used to wonder if finding you again would feel the way I remembered. I was afraid that too much time had passed, that we had become different people." Marcus smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. "And now? Now I realize that some connections are stronger than time or distance or even decades of separation. You're still my brother, Marcus. You're still the other half of my soul." As the weekend visit came to an end, both brothers made plans for regular contact and future visits. David's family would return for the holidays, and Marcus, Jamie, and Lucas would visit Phoenix during the summer. After 28 years of separation, the Chen brothers were finally ready to rebuild the relationship that had been stolen from them as children. That night, as Marcus tucked the faded photograph back into his desk drawer, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. The traumatic accident that had brought Jamie and Lucas into his life had ultimately led to this reunion with David. By saving the twins, by refusing to let them be separated, Marcus had somehow found his way back to his own brother and healed the deepest wound in his heart. Standing in the doorway of Jamie and Lucas's old bedroom, now converted to a study but still holding memories of their childhood, Marcus felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the mysterious ways that love finds its way through the darkness. The twins had returned his gift of life and family 1,000-fold, teaching him that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from fixing what's broken, but from creating something new and beautiful from the pieces that remain. The photograph that had sustained both brothers through decades of separation would always be precious to them, but it was no longer their only connection to each other. They had a future to build together now, surrounded by the family that love had created from the ashes of tragedy. And at the center of it all were Jamie and Lucas, the two little boys whose lives Marcus had saved, and who had, in return, saved his. In the months that followed, the extended Chen family grew stronger and more connected. David and his family became regular visitors, and Marcus discovered the joy of being an uncle to Sophia, who reminded him so much of Jamie and Lucas at that age, curious, resilient, and wise beyond her years. The brothers began taking annual trips together, just the two of them, slowly rebuilding the intimacy they had lost and creating new memories to add to their childhood ones. Jamie and Lucas, now in their early 20s, often marveled at how their search for their uncle had brought such healing to their father. They had grown up seeing Marcus as a man of quiet strength and unwavering love, but they had also sensed the sadness he carried, a loneliness that even their presence couldn't completely fill. Now, watching him laugh with David over shared memories and inside jokes that went back to their earliest childhood, they finally saw their father completely happy for the first time. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Lucas said to Jamie one evening as they watched Marcus and David sorting through old photographs and documents that David had kept from their childhood. "Dad saved us because he knew what it was like to lose a brother. And by saving us, he eventually found his brother again. It's like the universe was just waiting for him to heal one family before it would let him heal his own." Jamie nodded, understanding the profound symmetry of their story. "And the best part is that we all found each other. Not just me and you with Dad and Dad with Uncle David, but all of us together. We're not just the family that survived. We're the family that was meant to be. As Marcus listened to his son's conversation from the next room, he felt his heart swell with gratitude for the mysterious workings of fate that had brought them all together. The photograph that David had carried for 28 years now sat framed on Marcus's mantelpiece, next to pictures of Jamie and Lucas at every stage of their lives, from their first day home from the hospital to their recent college graduations. It was a testament to the power of love to endure, to heal, and to create miracles from the most unlikely circumstances. The story that had begun with tragedy in an operating room had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary power of family. Not just the families we're born into, but the families we choose and create through love, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to each other. Marcus had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts in life come wrapped in the most difficult circumstances, and that healing one broken heart often leads to healing many others. And every time he looked at that precious photograph, Marcus was reminded that love truly is stronger than time, stronger than distance, and stronger than any force that tries to tear families apart. The twins had returned with more than just a photograph. They had returned with the missing piece of his soul.